The Pear Affair, Chapter 7. Nell couldn't go back to the hotel. She wouldn't. Pear hadn't been in her apartment for 6 whole months. She'd lost her job. She couldn't pay the rent, and wherever she'd gone, she hadn't been able to take the cat. Nell sank down onto the bottom step of Passage Julien Lacroix and thought hard. Someone must know something. Someone must be hiding something. Crown Couture were being weirdly secretive. But why? The girl, the one with the red hair, had been about to blurt something out before Monsieur Crown had arrived. Nell grabbed her satchel and began to walk back towards the metro. The only thing to do was to wait outside Crown Couture for the girl to come out and somehow make her talk. By the time Nell got back to Crown Couture, it was gone 3 o'clock. Ducking her head so the awful Madame Valerie wouldn't see her, she scanned the hours of business engraved on the door in curly gold script. Closing at 6? That was 3 whole hours to wait, and she was starving. She could go in that cafe opposite, but first she needed to change her magnificent candy money into francs. Taking a deep breath, she went into the nearest bank, which was a little way down the street. There were several counters, one of which had a sign above it, Bureau de Change. "I'd like to change this," she said to the lady at the desk, pushing all her coins across the counter. "You speak excellent French," the lady smiled, counting out 5 francs. It wasn't quite as much as Nell had expected. "Are you on holiday?" "Yes," replied Nell, pocketing the money, and then, just in case, added, "My mum's waiting outside." In the cafe, she selected a seat on the terrace with a good view of Crown Couture. When the waiter came to take her order, she asked for saucisse et frites and a diable au menthe, because that was the drink the characters always ordered in her French textbook. The drink, when it arrived, was luminous green and tasted like toothpaste, and she nearly spat out the first sip. At least that meant she was forced to drink it slowly. There was a long wait ahead. The hours ticked by. At 4 o'clock she ordered a lemonade. At 5 o'clock a hot chocolate. Melinda and Gerald would be expecting her now. Would they go to Venice without her? They'd have to, because she wasn't going anywhere until she'd found Pear. At 6 o'clock she ordered a grenadine and the waiter presented her with the bill. When she saw the amount, Nell tried to hide her surprise. She only just had enough money. Out of her whole 5 francs, she only had 30 centimes left. At last the door across the road opened and the petit main tumbled out in 2s and 3s, stretching and chatting, calling goodbyes to each other. There she was, the red-haired girl. But unlike the others, she wasn't hanging about. Instead, she darted out and rushed off down the street in a flash of blue dress and white plimsolls. Nell leapt up, pushing her chair back so quickly it clattered to the floor. Hastily setting it to rights, she grabbed her satchel and ran across the street. A car screeched to a halt, a hand on the horn. "Fais gaffe!" shouted the driver through the open window. "Sorry!" shouted Nell. Oh no, the girl had gone. Or was that her turning the corner? Nell sped up. It was her. She was fishing a book out of her bag now and starting to read as she walked along. "Please wait!" shouted Nell. The girl flicked a red plait over one shoulder, oblivious to everything and everyone. She had picked up her pace now, bouncing along in her plimsolls, her nose still buried in the book. "'Scuse me!" Nell shouted again, louder this time. Now the girl had heard. She stopped, turned around, saw Nell, shoved the book under her arm and started running. "No!" yelled Nell. "I only want to talk." She raced after the girl, down the street, up a wide avenue, zigzagging between pedestrians and trees, into another narrow street, along a passageway, into yet another street. Was the girl slowing down? Nell's heart was pounding, but still she managed to increase her pace. She careened around a corner, and suddenly there was the girl, so close that Nell bashed into her and knocked her to the ground. "What? How dare you? Get off!" the girl shouted, twisting underneath Nell and jabbing at her with her elbows. "Not until you tell me about Perrine," panted Nell, clinging onto the girl's arm. But the girl wriggled out of Nell's grasp and sprang to her feet. She was strong. "The woman you are talking about," said the girl, fiercely wrenching away from Nell, who was making a grab for her again, "is a thief. She was sacked, caught stealing from a client. Is that what you wanted to know?" Furiously, she smoothed the crumpled pages of her book. "Look what you've done." Nell stopped, open-mouthed. She hadn't expected this. The fight whooshed out of her body in one fell swoop. "And also, it's wrong to chase someone when they obviously don't want to be followed. So stop, okay?" the girl snapped. What was she doing now? She was bending down, fumbling for something on the pavement. And then Nell's eyes nearly popped out of her head, because the girl was actually grasping a manhole cover, her fingers curling around the metal tab, heaving up the lid, pushing it aside, and then clambering down into the blackness below. "I mean it, leave me alone," the girl said, when Nell could only see her head. There was a clang as she reached out and dragged the lid back over the hole, and then she was gone. That was 2 days in a row Nell had seen people disappearing underground. She could barely believe what had just happened. The girl had said Pear was a thief. Is that why she had left her apartment in such a hurry? Were the police looking for her? Was she on the run? Nell bent down and heaved at the metal cover. It made a horrible scraping noise as she dragged it to one side. A gaping black hole stared back at her, taunting her. Despite what the girl had said, Nell knew she should follow her. She had a million more questions to ask. The girl must have got it wrong. But she couldn't. Nell's heart was already in her throat just thinking about the blackness beneath her. She felt stupid, helpless. Long, long ago she hadn't been afraid of the dark. Before Pear she'd been fine. But not after. Nell stood up and backed away. Do it, chanted a mocking voice inside her head. "I can't," she shouted. There was a ringing in her ears. She turned and walked blindly back down the street. "Mademoiselle Penelope!" Was that someone calling her? She turned around and saw, with a flurry of surprise, that it was the bellboy, Xavier. He was pink in the face, as if he had been running too. "What are you doing?" he said. "Your parents sent me to find you. They said you should have been back at 5 o'clock. Hot tears rushed to the back of Nell's eyes. She squeezed them shut to stop them spilling out. "Are you all right?" asked Xavier, concern flashing across his face. "I can't come back," said Nell. "What do you mean you can't come back? They're waiting for you. You're going to Venice. You'll be able to go on a gondola, see the Bridge of Sighs." "I don't want to go on a gondola or see the Bridge of Sighs," exclaimed Nell. "I don't want to go to Venice. I came to Paris to look for someone, but she's disappeared and—" Xavier was looking baffled. It was all too complicated to explain. "Mademoiselle, please," said Xavier, and now he looked deadly serious. "Your mum nearly had me sacked this morning. If I don't return with you right away, she'll get me sacked now." Nell was torn. She could refuse to go with him, but if she did, what next? Her plan was in tatters. She had already run out of money. She hadn't even had the courage to follow that girl underground. Besides, Xavier was looking at her with such pleading eyes. "Okay, I'll come back with you," she said. She wasn't sure what else she could do. Maybe she really would have to go to Venice. "But only if you stop calling me Mademoiselle Penelope. I much prefer now." They had barely made it through the hotel entrance when a pale hand clutched at Nell's arm. "Penelope Magnificent," hissed Melinda. "We have about 3 minutes max until the taxi arrives, and I will not travel with you in that state. Whatever will people think?" Her cool gaze swept over her daughter, taking in the torn jeans, the faded red sweatshirt, the messy hair. "Your luggage is over there. Find a dress and get out of those rags." "And make it pronto," added Gerald. "We haven't got a minute to waste." Nell's face burned. Everyone in the hotel lobby was staring. Kneeling by her case, she dug out one of Melinda's hateful dresses. It was a horrible salmon-coloured thing made out of stiff crimpline with a high collar that was itchy and gave her a rash. Thankfully, Xavier had disappeared. "Over there," Melinda hissed, nodding to a door marked Dames. Nell had only just finished changing and was stuffing her jeans and t-shirt into her satchel when the door banged open. "How long does it take to change into a dress?" said Melinda, tapping her foot impatiently. "I told you to hurry up." Nell stared at her, resentment bubbling over, filling her chest, threatening to explode. She couldn't bear it any longer. "I went to find Pear," she burst out. "You... what?" Melinda crashed her bag down next to the fancy sinks. A red flush appeared at the base of her throat, blooming angrily up her neck. "I miss her. I want to see her. I looked for her today. She wrote to me once a month at school, and then the letters stopped. Just like that, bam! I know where she works and where she lives, so I thought I'd be able to find her, but I couldn't. She wasn't there." It came out in a jumble, but Melinda's eyes were sharp, and Mel knew she understood. "You promised you wouldn't be any trouble." Melinda was looking at her coldly. "Why didn't I leave you at home?" She turned to the mirror so her back was to Nell, but Nell could still see her in the reflection. Her gaze was stony hard. "I went to Crown Couture," said Nell. "You what?" "And someone told me she was sacked for stealing." Nell's voice got higher, louder. The teachers at school would have said she was getting hysterical, but she didn't care. "It's all your fault. Why did you send her away?" Melinda spun round. "It doesn't surprise me in the least that your friend has been accused of theft. You have no idea what that character is capable of. I told you I wouldn't discuss her with you 5 years ago, and I'm certainly not going to start now." There was a knock at the door, and then Gerald's voice calling, "Taxi's here, hurry!" "You heard," Melinda turned back to Nell. "Grab your things and come, and please don't draw attention to yourself on the way out." The door slammed. By the sink, crocodile skin and gold glinted under the bright lights. Her mother had left her be-all and end-all, the bag. Nell plucked it up. The chain clinked against the diamond clasp. Quickly, she pushed open the bathroom door. On the other side of the lobby, she saw Melinda disappearing through the revolving doors. Gerald would be waiting in the taxi. Any minute now, Melinda would realise she'd forgotten her bag. The chain was slippery cold in Nell's hands. She could walk over there, out of the door, down the steps, into the taxi, and return the bag. Melinda would take it without looking at her. The taxi would pull away, they'd all leave and catch the train to Venice, and nothing would change. Everything would be the same. She'd never find Pear. Or she could run, get away from them, set herself free. Out of the lobby she ran, away from the Grand Hotel entrance, through a door marked privé, down a flight of steps, along a corridor, through the swing doors, and into the kitchen. It was transformed, nothing like the previous night. Now it was a theatre of bubbling pots and pans, chopping, stirring, tasting, and everyone far too busy to notice a small girl dressed in salmon pink streaking across the floor and through the door on the other side. Nell bounded down the stairs and into the boiler room. Slamming the door behind her, she leaned against it, breathing hard. Her heart was hammering, boom, boom, boom. But the room hummed and clicked quietly, warm and cocoon-like, as if it was saying, "Don't worry, you're safe now." Except she wasn't. Any minute now, Melinda would realise she'd left her handbag in the bathroom. When she found neither Nell nor the bag, she would explode. Every single person in the hotel room would be charged with looking for her. Someone would find her and take her back up. She couldn't bear to go to Venice with them. She couldn't. The thoughts spiralled up and up in utter panic. A sob escaped her throat. What was she going to do? Somewhere outside she heard whistling. Michel, he was just the sort of person to whistle tunes. Would he hide her? Of course not. She hardly knew him. Besides, he was an adult. Even if she tried to explain everything, he wouldn't understand. The whistling was getting closer. Any minute now he'd find her. Nell gazed wildly around the room, looking for somewhere to hide. But already she knew there was only one safe space. Xavier had disappeared down there the night before. The girl with the red plaits had disappeared down one a few streets away now. Nell took a step forward and stopped. It would be worse than the blackest nights at summer's end. Fear clawed at her. She felt clammy and cold. She couldn't do it. But the whistling was getting closer, and she needed to do something fast. What was worse, dropping down into the deep, dark unknown, or being chained to Melinda and Gerald for the rest of her life?